When constructing the figure, there's a lot of information that goes into it, and sometimes it's hard to keep track of. So let's go ahead and put that information to use and find a way to organize ourselves during the process. So we're going to go ahead and try to reconstruct this figure from this reference here. Now when we're looking at the figure, we want to find a certain rhythm or flow to the pose. So there's a nice little rhythm that goes from the top, that's from the head, to right around the scapulas. And that kind of bends in a little bit, comes back out with the tilt of those hips there, and then goes back in. And that's that angle of the leg here. And there's this nice, beautiful counterbalance with this leg in here. Right. It also kind of balances out here. So what do I have now? I have this abstract shape here. And this abstract shape is representative of what this pose is, or what gesture I'm trying to capture there. And notice I didn't have to go to the boundaries immediately. I went from the top of the head in the middle, down the back, captured this angle of the back leaning in so that she's pushing forward a little bit with her hips, and there's a little bit of an angle here in the hips, and that angle down here counters this angle here. And that's what I captured in here. So what am I looking for next? Remember, I mentioned the tilt of the hips in here, and now it may not seem like much of a tilt, but there's a little tilt from top to bottom here. So I like to put that in just to know where the flow of that gesture is going forward. And I don't have to put this calf in, but I kind of want to. And notice this calf kind of lines up with that shoulder there. So I'm gonna put that, make sure that angle is correct. The feet are kind of going forward, so I'm gonna push that angle a little bit further. What else am I looking for? Well, I know that this back in here is a top facing plane. How do I know that? Because the light in here is shining down on it. And this is gonna be a shadow in here. And that's just a shape, that's just a shape. I don't have to worry about putting in the anatomy of what's going on in here. I don't have to worry about like going into detail with the scapulas in here. And no, I can just push the shape. Now, what does that information give me right now? That tells me, this shape tells me that the body is going in. So there's light up here that, and an absence of light down here. That means that this is a top-facing plane that pushes in underneath. Same thing for the hips in here. So you have those glutes that make up this shape in here, and then you have this big shadow shape. You have this big shadow shape in here. And I don't have to worry about proportion just yet because I'm just putting down shapes. I'm just putting down a general measure of what's happening in this pose here. And now that I have this up here, I can use the shapes that I have to set a proportion for what I see up here. I can push these shapes around, thicken them or lengthen them in order to get the accuracy of this pose. There's that little tilt. And I know that this angle kind of matches up where the hair ends. So I can put that angle in, right? This one, this little point here matches where that trap goes in there. Right, so now I have an idea of where the shoulders are. Maybe this goes up a little bit higher just to get an accurate representation of the head. So what am I looking for now? I'm looking for this center line to make sure I have an accurate read on what I'm seeing. That center line goes from the back of the head down the scapula, comes in around the top middle of the back, that goes in, and then the hips naturally protrude out from underneath. So this is the angle of my hips here. And then the angle of the legs come down here. I remember this pose too. I remember that there was this shape in here, but the shadow kind of drapes over the side of the model. This is about the angle of where the glutes are. That's where the hip was. Because I know that the hips are tilted at this angle, I know that the shape is entirely tilted at that angle, right? This is the shape I'm looking for. That's that box that I went over a few videos ago. And the box in here is right there. That's the rib cage right in there. So where do I go from here? I'm going to overstate that shadow a little bit. I can maybe put in a general marker for the arm in here, right? Put this in here. Now, all of this information is giving me a read on the proportions. How do I adjust my proportions? I know I talk about it a lot, but I can take my trusty paper towel and push it in, right? I can make it thinner that way, or I can use my paintbrush and just add more mass to thicken it, right? But in this case, I'm actually going to thin it out a little bit. I'm going to overstate this shadow in here. It kind of comes down here. I know her arm was sticking out a little bit, so I'm just going to do that. Remember, I'm not going into detail. I'm not going into detail at all. Not yet. This is the beginning stage. What this gives me is the information needed to take it a step further. I don't need to go into detail because the strength of this drawing relies on this abstraction right now. And from what I can tell here, I probably need to push this arm out a little bit because we're seeing more of this arm a little. This one's kind of like behind her a little bit. And what can I do to make sure I'm still using shapes as a gauge? So we don't just have these shadow shapes. If you notice, there's also light shapes in here that we can use to gauge the proportions. So I can bring this light out. See how her arm kind of tucks just a little bit. There's a little bit of shadow at the back of her arm, but that arm kind of tucks behind the back just a little bit. And I can capture that here by removing the medium. I can remove a little bit here. That looks a little thick to me, so I'm just gonna bring it in just a little bit. And I'm gonna remove the excess. Just a little bit. I don't have to remove a lot, but that already looks a little bit better to me. I can put in a general angle where that hair is. I want to make sure I have a boundary set for where the feet are. And at this point of the drawing, we could probably start drawing out some more lights. Actually, I want to get the proportions a little bit more accurate. So I noticed that the hips are a little wide in here compared to where they are here. So what am I going to do? I noticed that here, there's a little bit more space underneath the arm. So that I'm going to draw out, I'm going to remove some of that medium to thin up the hips a little bit. And that already looks a lot better. I see that this back in here, the hips could probably go up just a little bit more because in here it's a little bit shorter than what I have in here. So I'm going to push that just a little bit. And I know that the light goes to the edge. So I'm going to draw out that edge a little bit. So at this point, we have the abstraction of the figure, and we're using these shapes to get a more accurate read on what we're seeing. And I noticed that the calf here kind of lines up with the elbow just a little bit. It comes to the outside of the elbow, so I'm gonna make sure that's a little bit more accurate. And this here, the back of the calf, kind of lines up with the arm that's coming in here. So we're gonna make sure we have that a little bit more accurate. Remember, this is just a shape. This is just a shape. But because I'm relating the shape to itself, to the rest of the figure, I'm getting more and more accurate. I notice that this kind of comes out, that comes out, and maybe this goes in just a little bit. So we're gonna push that just a little bit. Now it looks a little too thin. So what am I seeing over here that's not translating over here? I'm noticing that this part here needs to come out just a little bit because this area is pushed a little further. All right. That looks a little better. She's a little straighter in this position than she is here, but I like the gesture that we're doing here, so we're just gonna leave that. I'm also noticing that this kind of comes up just a little bit. So her hips are a little bit higher than what I have them. I'm gonna draw that out just a little bit. Oop. Right. Do you see how I use the shape of the light and the shape of the shadow to get a more accurate read on what I'm seeing? It's all about pushing and pulling, pushing and pulling. I can push this way. I can pull this way if I wanted to. But right now I just want to push. I just want to push this angle out because that's what I'm seeing over here. It's at this point where I would start thinking about anatomy. Anatomy is a whole nother beast, so you don't really have to worry about it for now. But what we have is a very good start. Having strong foundations at the beginning of your drawing will only enhance it the further along you get. You can use these foundational steps as a way to get started in your own practice. If you stuck around, thank you. I appreciate you, and I love you. Have a great day.